Sometimes in the world of federal investigations, the stars just align in a way that feels, honestly, almost scripted. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly historic story out of Minnesota. We're talking about a monumental sentencing that happened to fall on the exact same day as a massive, sweeping set of brand new, multi-million-dollar fraud indictments. We're going to dive into the numbers, the wild individual stories, and the systemic loopholes that made all of this possible. Because when it comes to accountability, timing is literally everything. I mean, consider this. We have the culmination of a historic, long-running case. A 41-year prison sentence handed down to Aimee Bock, the convicted ringleader of the infamous Feeding Our Future fraud scheme. But contrast that with what happened next. On the very same day the gavel came down on Bock, the Department of Justice announced 15 new indictments for fresh fraud schemes totaling over $90 million. It's just a stunning juxtaposition. Past accountability colliding head-on with a vast new wave of enforcement. So, to really understand how this entire $90 million rub operated, we're relying on data and reporting straight from Shasta Unfiltered. We're going to neutrally follow the money here and figure out the exact timeline of how these astonishing numbers came to be. Okay, we need to set the stage first with an absolutely massive number, $250 million. That was the financial scale of the initial Feeding Our Future scheme led by Aimee Bock. It's completely crucial to grasp the sheer gravity of that number so we can understand the context of the crimes we're looking at today. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars meant to feed children, just systematically siphoned off. It basically set the precedent for the scale of fraud that investigators were dealing with in this region. Now, look at the number 500, and no, that isn't a dollar amount. That represents months. 500 months in federal prison. That's over 41 years. That is the sentence handed down to Aimee Bock. For a long time, the public has wondered if these complex white-collar crimes would ever really result in serious jail time. Well, this 500-month sentence is the justice system very loudly answering that question. It proves that real severe consequences are finally landing for the people who exploit these programs. All right, Section 1, unpacking the new charges in this $90 million web.
See, the DOJ definitely wasn't just resting on the victory of that 41-year sentence. They used that exact same day to send a massive shockwave right through the system, dropping fresh charges against 15 new defendants in a brand new web of alleged exploitation. So where exactly is this $90 million coming from? Well, federal prosecutors announced that these new charges heavily target Medicaid-related programs. We're talking about child care assistance, housing stabilization services, and crucially, autism and early intervention programs. In fact, this is actually being described as one of the largest autism fraud cases ever charged in the district. It seems the perpetrators allegedly pivoted from exploiting food programs to exploiting the very systems designed to help our most vulnerable children and families find housing and medical care.
Geographically speaking, the data points to a very specific concentration for these investigations. According to the source reporting, these latest cases are heavily concentrated in Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, which is represented by Representative Ilhan Omar. Just looking at the broader data neutrally, this intense concentration makes Minnesota the nationwide leader in these types of large-scale social services fraud cases. The sheer volume of federal scrutiny zeroed in on this one specific geographic area is a really critical data point in understanding the full scope of the issue. Moving on to Section 2, Profiles in Fraud, the Faces Behind the Numbers. So we've looked at the big macro-level statistics, but to really grasp how these schemes operated on the ground, we have to look at the specific individuals named in these latest indictments. Let's start with Fahima E. Gay Muhammad. She's one of the most visible names in this new wave of charges. She was the owner and CEO of Future Leaders Early Learning Center in Minneapolis. The DOJ hit her with new federal charges tied to roughly $4.6 million in alleged child care fraud. But guys, here is the truly fascinating detail. Muhammad was already charged in the initial Feeding Our Future scandal. She was already fully entangled in a federal fraud investigation, and yet these new charges were allegedly still accumulating. And her operations were actually under intense public scrutiny way before the FBI even stepped in. You might have seen this. Viral videos by an investigator named Nick Shirley exposed these daycares, showing facilities that appeared entirely empty or barely operational. We are talking about quote-unquote ghost kids, claiming government subsidies for children who simply weren't there. The most notorious of these was a facility widely mocked online as the Quality Learning Center. Yeah, because the giant sign right above the door literally misspelled the word learning. It's a detail so absurd you'd think it was written for a movie, but it was a very real front for alleged fraud. But hey, the cinematic details really don't stop there. Take our next defendant, Mohammed Abdelkadir Omar. He's facing charges for approximately $3.3 million in fraudulent claims tied to housing stabilization services. When the FBI actually arrived to arrest Omar for this $3.3 million fraud, things took a seriously dramatic turn. According to the reports, he literally jumped from a fourth-floor balcony to evade capture by federal agents. He was eventually apprehended, but just picture that for a second. A suspect leaping from a four-story building to escape the FBI. It really underscores just how desperate things got once this whole financial house of cards started to collapse. Section 3. A systemic failure, ghost kids, and weak oversight. All right, we need to zoom back out for a sec. Because while misspelled signs and crazy balcony jumps make for incredible headlines, they're really just symptoms of a much larger systemic failure. The overarching theme from all our source data points to a massive breakdown in government administration. These aren't isolated evil geniuses, right? These are individuals who allegedly exploited a system that basically left the back door wide open. Just look at this pattern: loosely supervised government programs characterized by incredibly weak oversight. When you combine that lack of scrutiny with billions of taxpayer dollars flowing freely, well, you create a perfect recipe for disaster. The result is money intended to help the needy being diverted for personal gain on a scale that totals in the hundreds of millions and potentially billions of dollars across all these programs. As we bring the pieces of this explainer together, we're left with this huge core tension. On one hand, we've got the tragedy of stolen public funds. Money meant for childcare, housing, and autism intervention that was allegedly just pocketed. The source reporting makes a very firm conclusion here. The public absolutely deserves real services for those who genuinely need them. But to protect those genuine services, there has to be real consequences for people who steal from the system. That 41-year sentence and those 15 new indictments dropping on the exact same day, that sends a loud, clear message. Accountability is catching up, justice is arriving, and honestly, more is expected. But it leaves us with this absolutely crucial final thought to walk away with today. Will these real consequences finally fix a broken system? Locking people up addresses the crime for sure, but does it close the loopholes that allowed $250 million and then another $90 million to just slip through the cracks in the first place? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, keep learning.